look, we might get underway. I'll just ask everybody if you could just mute yourselves. Thank you, appreciate that. So we'll get underway. Welcome everybody to today's Research Passport Agreement webinar. So I'm going to provide a brief introduction. I note that we were expecting quite a few people on the call today. We've got nearly 100 so far. We're expecting probably another 70 or 80. But look, we'll get underway and hopefully as those people come in, they'll be able to catch up. So welcome everyone. Really appreciate you making time to come to the webinar today. My name's David Bunker. I'm the Executive Director of the Brisbane Diamantina Health Partnership. So before we get underway today, what I would like to do is just pause and reflect on the fact that we're meeting today, albeit virtually, on custodial land of the oldest living civilization in the world. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognising their continuing connection to land, waters and to culture. We pay our respects to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on the webinar today. Welcome everybody. So the purpose of today's webinar is to provide an update and overview on the Research Passport Agreement. The BDHP Research Passport Agreement is a collaborative agreement that aims to streamline the approval process for researchers, saving them time and legal costs. BDHP has established a human research ethics and governance working group, which has been involved in reviewing the processes and timeline for ethics and governance approvals within hospitals, university and research institutes, partners, and to develop an agreed framework, including the BDHP Research Passport Agreement. So I wanted to acknowledge that group and thank them for their continuing support. So on the meeting today, click, we go, our agenda. So in terms of Zoom and security, just to let you know, so everybody who's joined, you've already worked out that there was a password. So we've got a password on this. I just wanted to reiterate that the webinar that we're doing today is effectively public information. So there's nothing confidential that we're going to be sharing today, but we have applied the standards as appropriate to using this particular meeting technology. And this technology is actually using the University of Queensland Zoom system. So we're not using a public Zoom system. Now we're expecting over 180 people on the call today. And obviously we want to ensure that the microphones are off. And you can turn your cameras off if you wish to as well. This is going to just save a little bit of bandwidth, and obviously we'll have the cameras on and for the speakers themselves. I can mute everybody magically through the powers of Zoom, but I'd rather not have to do that. So let's just acknowledge the people we've got. So given the number of people on the call today, this is our webinar scenario. We've got some ways of doing some interactive work with you. We're going to trial that in a second. But we're not going to be able to do a broad Q&A session. But obviously, we're very keen to get feedback from you, and we're really keen to engage you and discuss with you offline how the passport agreement's working and get your input to that. So we will have some interactive sessions throughout the speakers. And thank you very much to all of those who actually were able to submit some questions to us in advance as per the invitation. And the content in the presentations that we've got today will address some of these questions. And Sarah Gottliebson from BDHP has also been answering a number of those individual questions. So I'd like to start by getting you to go to, on your browser or on your device of choice, if you can go to menti.com, menti.com. What we're going to do is just start this interactive part of our session. And what we'll get you to do is log on to menti.com. And then what we'll do is we'll get you to key a little PIN number in. So that PIN is 277422. You can see that at the top of the screen. We're interested in who's on the call today. So we're interested in the role that you have and what you're interested in the passport agreement is. So I'll just send to everybody on the line that is menti.com, menti.com. And if you put in the passcode 277422, and you'll see on the screen people starting to come in here. So dietitian, researcher. As your contribution comes in, what Menti is doing is a little word cloud. And it's just an idea to understand who's on the call today, I should also note that we're recording this call and we'll want to make it available on our website for other folks to look at. And by capturing this, it lets people know who's on the call and the focus. So clearly lots of researchers, people involved in governance, research coordination, contracting, research managers. This is really great. Keep it coming. So I'll just leave this going for a little bit. And I can see we've had 49, 50 odd people respond. So just as you're going into Menti and adding this on, that's terrific. Excellent. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll move on now because we've got one other little question we'd like to capture as well. So just in terms of what you want to get out of today. So how many of you have been involved in using the BDHP passport agreement to date? So I'll open this Menti again. So it's really just a simple yes, no, not sure. So we're keen to get an idea of the people on the call today who's had some direct experience with the research passport agreement, and then you'll hear from our speakers today, and we'll get that update, and we're keen to understand who's using it and how and where. The notion, of course, is that we want to make sure this is an effective tool that is able to save time and money and support clinical innovation and health research. So I'll keep this going for a bit as well. And then this will be the last one, and we'll get into I'll introduce our moderator for today. Excellent. So that's good. So quite a lot of people have been involved in using it, and a few no's and a few not sure's. That's good. Okay. So look, what I'll do now is we'll move forward. So it's my real pleasure today to introduce Professor Scott Bell, who's going to moderate the session today with our speakers. Professor Bell is the Chief Executive Officer of the Translational Research Institute. Professor Bell is a leading clinician and researcher in cystic fibrosis. He recently co-led the development of a new global blueprint for the care of people with the fatal genetic disorder. His work will help the 3,500 Australians with the incurable condition to live decades longer. Professor Bell has over 250 peer-reviewed publications and has received grant support in excess of 22 million over the last 10 years. He's a senior thoracic physician at the Prince Charles Hospital and editor-in-chief of the Journal of Cystic Fibrosis. Prior to his appointment at TRI as the CEO, Professor Bell was the Executive Director of Research at Metro North Health and Hospital Service and the head of QIMR Berghofer's Lung Bacteria Laboratory. And Professor Bell has been a real champion of the Research Passport Agreement, and we're very lucky to have him here and to introduce our speakers today, and to start by saying a few words about the Passport Agreement and where that fits in. So over to you, Scott, and you should be right to unmute your mic.
Thank you very much, David, for a very kind introduction. For those people who know me well, you'll know that this is a topic dear to my heart. I've wrestled with governance officers all over the state and beyond. I've talked in detail with the Queensland Director Generals and also discussed this in detail with the Chief Executive of NHMRC. And everyone acknowledges this part of our research approval process is challenging. Until 10 years ago, the roadblock was really the ethical approval. And it was fantastic with the HOMA program and then the mutual acceptance of research by NHMRC accredited research committees that this really drifted away into past history. However, as we all know, this has been replaced by some challenges in getting site-specific approval, what we call governance approval. And most of the challenges there are actually around getting agreements between research partners agreed upon, edited, amended, and then signed off by the leaders of each of our research programs. It's a well-publicised challenge that costs millions of dollars, resulting in taxpayer waste and huge frustration to researchers all around the country. And in fact, it's a global problem. BDHP, along with its partners, has worked hard to develop a standardised agreement, which was launched several years ago, and it has had a significant impact. Recently, it's launched its second version of this. I should highlight that the original casting of the agreement was actually developed by one of our health service legal leaders that was adopted by a number of health services, and it became the template for the original BDHP agreement. All partners of BDHP have collaborated. It's taken time. Partner legal teams, ethics and governance experts, and end users have been involved in the process. And perhaps one of the most important additions to the new agreement is the opportunity for third-party agreements, where you might be undertaking a program of work which involves a number of BDHP partners, but involves another one, such as Griffith University or the University of Melbourne or Melbourne Hospital. And previously, the BDHP agreement wasn't able to be used in that situation. I am sure that the speakers will provide some guidance around when the BDHP agreement is appropriate, but we also know that there are times when it should be shelved, and I'm hoping to hear when those times should be. So that's my opening sort of comments on the issue. I'll be very interested in all of our speakers. David, I think your request is for me to introduce each of the speakers now. Is that correct? And then get them to speak. That's what my notes say. Okay, so our first speaker will be Sarah Gottliebsen. Sarah is the BDHP Policy Officer for Research and Governance, and she's relatively new to BDHP, only starting in March. Sarah has 15 years of research administration experience in the higher education sector and has worked at the University of Sheffield and more recently at QBI UQ. She has a wealth of experience to bring to her new role, having worked in both ethics and governance and around project management for clinical trials. Our second speaker will be known to most people online, Sonia Hancock, who similarly has decades of experience in research administration, covering off compliance, integrating research into clinical care and its delivery. Her experience encompasses study coordination, including immunotherapy trials, research ethics, committee coordination, research governance management, and delivery of strategic vision. Sonia's very much had a continuous improvement mindset, and her style and her passion foster high quality research outputs. And we really look forward to hearing Sonia speak today. Our third speaker is Dr. Dominique Bird, who's a researcher at the Centre for Health Services Research at the University of Queensland. And she's currently involved in a BDHP funded study looking at type 2 diabetes. Previously, she's been the program manager for the Centre of Research Excellence in Telehealth until September 2019. Her research interests are focused on digital health initiatives to improve healthcare delivery, in particular to support diabetes self-management. So I think you'd agree with me, we've got three excellent speakers, and we're going to sort of now turn over to Sarah, who's going to speak to the topic of the revised BDHP Research Passport Agreement.
Okay, thanks, Scott, for the introduction. I'm just going to give you a background around the Research Passport and how it's been developed, information on using the agreement, and what are the benefits. So I'd like to start off by giving you some background on the Research Passport. BDHP initially held forums to see how it could facilitate research translation, and an outcome of the forums was the need to streamline research governance processes. BDHP established a Human Research Ethics and Governance Working Group in 2016, and the group identified delays in contractual management as the highest priority. Partner lawyers drafted an umbrella research passport agreement to streamline governance processes, which was signed off by all partners. The research passport started to be used in early 2017, and in 2018, BDHP carried out a survey where it was found that the research passport had been widely used over approximately 300 times. So this brings me on to version 2 of the passport. So the 2008 survey also provided information to further improve the research passport, and BDHP convened a meeting of legal representatives, took on board the comments and developed version 2 and a new third-party agreement. These documents were endorsed and signed off by all partners and BDHP board members in April 2020. What are the changes to version 2? We have included easier terminology and information on each item in the schedule. There is a prompt box that can be hovered over with your mouse, which provides you with additional information. And we've also developed a new third-party agreement to make including non-partner collaborations easier. Next slide. So this brings me on to using the agreement, and the research passport has been developed for research that does not require other standard agreements such as Medicines Australia, NHMRC or G08. If your research requires such agreements, then the research passport should not be used. The purpose of this agreement is for use with simple, straightforward research where there are no pre-existing or background intellectual property. Variations to the passport are allowed, and we encourage researchers to liaise with their organisation lawyer and partner lawyers as early as possible. Third parties can now be added as research collaborators using the new third-party agreement. And to assist using the agreement research passport, BDHP have developed a new user guide which includes some frequently asked questions and which can be downloaded from our website. The next slide. So this slide reiterates what I've just said with regards to the kind of research the passport is and isn't recommended for. It is recommended for low risk research, research with no pre-existing or background intellectual property, and research that does not require other standard agreements. It is not recommended for research that includes international institutions, clinical trials, commercial in confidence projects, and standalone postgraduate scholarships. So the next part of my talk is going to be the interactive part, Dave. And if you can all head over to menti.com, you'll see the question. So I have a quick knowledge check. What type of research is the BDHP research passport to be used for? There are 4 responses. Tick the answers that you think are correct. So were you listening? Looks like you were. Great. Nobody said clinical trials or international institutions. So it is for low risk research, research with no pre-existing background IP. That's great. Are we still going? Okay, great. And my next question, so it looks like you were all listening. Nobody said clinical trials. Great. So another question, what benefits do you think the BDHP research passport brings to undertaking research across the different organisations in BDHP? We've listed 3 statements, and which are all true, and we'd like you to rate them in low benefit or high benefit. So great, it's looking like people think that the research passport does speed up time. It's the highest rank so far. Streamlining collaborations. Okay, so this gives us useful information to see what you all think the benefits are of the passport. So speeds up the time to startup, looks like it's the winner. And Dave's just hovering over there to see where the everything lies. Okay. So moving on, those three statements are true. They are all the main benefits that we think of the passport as use, and it's good to know what our partners think. And as I've said, the research passport is not compulsory, but it has found to speed up time in the process to implement new research projects, as the pre-agreed terms have been signed off by all partners. This helps reduce the time required going back and forth between legal teams. And all that needs to be signed off by each party when using the research passport is the project schedule. And as you can see from this testimonial on this slide, the research passport has been found easy to use because of the pre-approved framework. Next slide. So this is an information slide, and it summarises the 10 organisations in the BDHP partnership. Any organisation outside of the partnership can be included in a project by using the third-party agreement. Next slide. So where can you get a copy of the research passport? A downloadable copy of the passport, Schedule 2 and third-party agreement can be found on the BDHP Research Passport webpage. You will be asked to enter your name and email before downloading, and this is so we can contact you directly should there be any future changes. Alternatively, you can either email me or give me a call and I can email you a copy. Or finally, you can also obtain a copy with within your organisation by contacting your Research Governance Office. We welcome your feedback about the agreement and its use at any time, and please direct these to myself. And just thank you for listening.
So now I'll introduce Sonia. If you're ready to go, Sonia, bring yourself online.
All good.
Thank you.
Excellent. So good afternoon, everyone. Before I commence, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which we meet and would like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I think this presentation really gets down to the nitty gritty of what exactly that we have to do in relation to the passport agreement. So there once was a time when we only had a handful of template agreements that we would use interchangeably, and that would depend on the type of study. These template agreements were accepted 50% of the time, with the other 50% negotiating a new contract that essentially led to the same end, but some months later. Researchers and contract managers would equally find this process exhausting. Fast forward to now, when we have a collective of 10 partners all working off the same agreement, albeit limited to a particular type of study, as we've just heard. If you look back on the last year or two, you'll actually find some cases where it took less time to execute the agreement than it did to submit the ethics application. Who would have thought? So we've just heard the why we should use the passport agreement, and my presentation will hopefully provide some insight on the who, what, when, and how to use it, and to use it efficiently and effectively. Last week, I actually had the opportunity to present at another webinar and brought up the notion of a single agreement, which is a hot topic at the moment. Thanks to virtual conveniences, and likewise now, I wasn't able to hear the collective gasp of surprise or the, are you serious? But hopefully have planted a seed for future growth. Equally, whilst taking you through some of the tips and tricks related to how you can use the passport agreement, I'd like to plant another seed. Could we take this agreement further? Can we make this agreement move across jurisdictional borders? And what will it take us to get there? Next slide, please. Okay, so the whole premise of developing a template agreement such as this is to facilitate and enable multi-centre collaborative research. As Scott noted in his introduction, there is a plethora of papers and arguments written by frustrated researchers primarily on the protracted length of time it does take to negotiate an agreement. For those who are involved in contract management or as a research governance officer, it doesn't take a literature search to tell us what we already know to be true. Before I continue any further, I must clear any ambiguity. The use of the agreement is not mandatory. It is, however, highly recommended for a select group of study types. The passport agreement is designed to take away the protracted legal negotiations by having a suite of predefined and, more importantly, legally pre-approved clauses so as to avoid having to engage a legal review. It essentially has a similar MO to that of the Medicines Australia suite of contracts for clinical trials, but on a smaller scale. Next slide, please. So as we've heard, any researchers that are collaborating with any of the BDHP partner organisations can use the agreement, with partners including Metro South, Metro North, Children's Health, Westmoreton, Mater UQ, QUT, TRI, QAMR and the Department of Health. Queensland's southeast corner is well connected. Any additional third parties such as Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast, Hospital and Health Services, or even Griffith University and University of Melbourne can be added to the agreement via the third party, which I will go into more detail shortly. Next slide, please. Okay, so when should it be used? I've kind of already touched on this in Sarah's presentation, but I'd like to really bring it home so that it's crystal clear where and when it can't be used. So it really is specifically designed to be used for research projects only. In other words, projects that have been HREC approved and require research governance authorisation to get started. It has been specifically designed for research that is deemed low risk, and examples of that include observational and non-interventional studies that have a relatively low to negligible commercial value. An example would include a study that seeks to correlate clinical markers with outcomes or data analysis. The health service provides the data and the academic partner has the biostat gurus to actually help analyse the data. For clinical trials and NHMRC or ARC funded studies, the passport agreement would not be a recommended option as there are specific considerations in these other agreements that are simply not covered within the clauses of the passport agreement. Likewise, for funding agreements, each funding body will have their own terms and conditions. Just recently, though, we have enabled the passport agreement to be used for BDHP funded studies. Also, standalone student research projects have obligations that are not covered in the laws are specifically set for Queensland, Australia within the passport agreement. Therefore, it's not recommended for use if you are going to involve an international collaborator. But the point that I really want to hit home, and will reinforce this through the rest of my presentation, is if you are ever in doubt as to which way you should proceed, please contact your research governance or contracts manager. Next slide, please. Admittedly, 3/4 of the joys of being a researcher is tied up with research administration. If only that time could be better redirected to conducting the research. Whilst the majority of researchers would see this part of the research process as burdensome, it is nevertheless vital to get it right. Establishing an agreement sets the path forward and clearly articulates the roles and responsibilities of all the parties, and most importantly, has the provisions of protection should things ever go pear-shaped. I, for one, never ever thought that the force majeure clause was particularly useful until, of course, COVID came along. So, when we are looking at whether or not the passport agreement is the right choice, I'll take you through who should fill it out. If you are the lead researcher, as soon as you have your protocol finalised and understand who you are collaborating with, contact your relevant contract management team or RGO and seek advice if the passport is the right way to go. If yes, complete the schedule ASAP. Thank you for changing the slide, I just realised. Start your contract negotiations at the same time as your HREC submission. I cannot stress that to you enough. You will save time in the long run, and it will take a lot less to get that bright spark idea up and running into a research project. If you're the collaborating researcher, when you receive the preliminary draft from the coordinating principal investigator, check that the information is correct and clearly identifies the who, the what, when and how principles. The why will always be in the protocol. Who is going to be collecting the data? What information will be provided? Are there any time points for deliverables? And how will, for example, the biospecimens be transferred? So from that point, it goes back to the lead researcher. And once the lead researcher has received information back from the collaborators, Strongly recommend that the draft agreement gets sent to your relevant contract manager, research governance officer to ensure that the bits and pieces in the schedule match and all institutional requirements are met. Only then, once you get the green light, then press the submit to enable execution. Whilst the RGOs and the contract management teams are here to facilitate execution and get your study up and running from a compliance perspective, this is your study. You own it and you drive it. If you haven't heard back from the relevant team within 2 weeks, please make a phone call. It is quite likely that the office is just busy and we're only human, so sometimes things do fall off the cliff. But if you haven't heard, please just give us a call. Next slide, please. Okay, so like I mentioned before, if there is a member within your research team who is not represented by one of the partners, you can still include them in the passport agreement. The third-party agreement has been endorsed as a mechanism to add non-BDHP organisations to a single agreement. You can access it either through your RGO or contract manager or by going to the BDHP webpage and selecting the agreement as shown above. You'll need to input your name, organisation you represent, as well as your email address. This will enable communication directly from BDHP, as well as maintaining a register of organisations using this agreement should any conditions within the agreement change. In terms of the contract management, the third-party agreement allows another party, for example, Gold Coast or University of Melbourne, to be added as a collaborator without requiring an additional agreement. The terms and conditions are fairly straightforward and are predominantly easily acceptable by the third party so as to avoid lengthy legal review. It is through this particular avenue that the possibility of having one agreement working across jurisdictions could be further explored. A conversation for another day. Next slide. So I'm sure many of you have heard of variations. So what exactly are they and what is the best way to handle it? I'll take you through a bit of a scenario. So imagine, if you will, you're part of a research team which includes Westmoreton, Metro North, QUT and UQ. The project schedule shows that the data range of data collection is from the 1st of January 2018 to the 1st of January 2020. During the course of the data collection, you realise that your data range was too short in that you didn't receive enough data sets during that time period, and you need to extend the data range, or the date range I should say. Following an amendment approval from your lead HREC, you'll need to ensure that your date range identified in the schedule accurately reflects your recently updated protocol. If it doesn't, and you were to collect the data outside the current listed date range, you would find that you may not be able to utilise that extra data, as the provisions of the agreement protect only what is specified in the project schedule, hence the requirement for a variation. A simple change to the project schedule that gets executed along the same lines as new agreement. So what you would do, again, a similar process to what you would have done when you set up the agreement in the first place, is make the change, providing your RGO, the contract manager, the justification of the change, as well as providing copies of any approval letters as they come through. But this is where we need to be clear. Never, ever, ever allow anyone to change the body of the agreement. So you only ever make changes to the project schedule, not the agreement itself. If you did, or if someone did, doing so will necessitate a referral for legal review, not by one legal team, but potentially 10. You can imagine the ramifications that would cause. So please provide your RGO or contract manager justification of the change and how this could be handled first before anything occurs. And the last slide, I'd just like to take you through relisting some of the do's and don'ts of the passport agreement to try and get them committed to memory. I'd like to finish by saying that it's not only the BDHP passport agreement that is forged on a partnership. Likewise, the process of research administration and contract management is a partnership. Whilst processes may change, be rest assured that the changes presented are as a result of enhancements to customer service delivery, where you, as the researcher, are the customers. Sometimes we get it right and sometimes we don't. Whilst everyone appreciates a simple thank you, we would also appreciate constructive feedback that articulates clearly where our service could be improved. Together, we can make it better. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sonia. That was a great overview, and thanks also, Sarah. Firstly, a comment. I think one of the most important learnings in research I've ever had is go and talk to the ethics and governance team. It should be an open door. You may have to make an appointment, but go and seek them out and ask questions early. It's invaluable saving of time. A question to you, Sonia, and maybe Sarah as well. You talked about in your last slide, in singular terms, third party. You also said that if you were working with the Gold Coast or the University of Melbourne, it all seemed to be one third party. What if I've got 20 third parties? Will it work? Can it work?
Whilst I've had the distinct pleasure of not having to negotiate that collective, I certainly can see how it could possibly work. It's like I said, the devil really is in the details. So long as it's clearly articulated in the project schedule, who is doing what, who is responsible for what, that's certainly a distinct opportunity that could be further explored.
Thank you. It doesn't look like we have any other questions, David. So we might, thank you very much, Sonia. And we might move on to our third speaker, Dominique Bird. She's going to talk about a researcher's perspective.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you, Sarah, for the clear outline, and Sonia for all the tips, very useful and noted. My tips will be from one experience using the research passport, and that was version 1 because it was last year. But I was asked to give a little bit of an experience putting the use of the passport in context. So the next slide will give the project context. So as I said, it was using the research passport version 1 for a project titled Mobile-Based Diabetes Management System, Redesigning Diabetes Care Through New Technologies, led by Tony Russell, who is a staff member at Metro South and also with UQ. So that's 2 partners there already. And the project was funded by a BDHP grant from the MRFF Rapid Applied Research Translation Program. And so that is a program that was funding a series of projects, not just one. So the other partners, in addition to Metro South, was Metro North Health and CSIRO eHealth Research Centre. Now, that centre from CSIRO is not a BDHP partner, as I understand it, but was, let's say, a familiar partner, and that really helped. So the next slide will describe a little bit our timeline and our experience. So as an investigator and project manager for this project, I was keen to see that this was going to happen quickly, so that our project would get to start point. So we heard in August that our proposal was selected for the collection of projects to be put forward to approval by MRFF. And so with that in mind, thinking we could hear from MRFF reasonably soon, we started to prepare, and as Sonia was saying, straight away work with our UQ Research Partnership Manager. That's the title of our legal office liaison person at UQ, at least in medicine. And I was delighted to hear there was this BDHP passport that everyone was already aware of it. They had seen it, they had used it, including CSIRO partner. They had actually been involved in a previous project using it before. So that was just a promising thinking that we would not have to deal with months of a drafting long process to create a template that everyone would agree. upon. Also, I noticed that it was easy to read. I could understand it, and I'm definitely not a person with legal background. So with that in mind, we confidently proceeded with the other steps. We got our, so that would be, yeah, I'm still on the right slides, yes. Ethics clearance was received in January. That was a low risk project looking at stakeholders' input to look at diabetes care, so definitely low risk. And meanwhile, the research passport was circulated amongst everyone with the schedule having been added, and making sure, as Sonia said, that everyone was in agreement with content, and any to make sure that everyone was in agreement with any amendment that had been put forward. And that meant that in March, our partners, as said, we're ready to sign as soon as we've got the above agreement, which is the funding agreement. So in not long after that, we hear that MRFF approved the body of work put forward by BDHP, and then the overhead agreements were signed. So that's the MRFF UQ agreement, and then a research specific agreement, so the research services agreement. So all is looking good. And then the next slide, take us to then following steps. So the following step was that some or most of the conditions from the overhead agreement had to be added to the BDHP passport. So therefore, the BDHP's passport, which was ready to sign, had to be recirculated. So then I'm just going, aha, what does that mean? Does that mean, do I need to be worried about that? And actually, the conditions did raise queries, but they were minor. So the level of concern went down. Unfortunately, as it happens, legal officers are busy, and there were only 3 queries, but each to and fro takes 2 weeks. So 4 weeks times 3, we had a 12-week delay. So we got our BDHP passport with a smile on in August, and then following that, Metro South governance, the lead governance office approved it, and we were grateful to have that done quickly. So I think the experience here for us was that the passport initially saved us a lot of time, and our research partnership manager was aware of it, was straight away able to recommend that. So obviously had been well informed, and we didn't not only waste time, but also didn't really use researchers' time to work on another agreement. So I've got one slide for tips. And as already said, prepare, speak with each legal office or representative in advance. It did pay off for us. We were ready to sign to some extent, but yes, there will be some delays. And that agreement schedule, we were able to complete it straight away. Our protocol was ready, so we were able to iron out any queries. We benefited from previous experience from our legal representative, but also from the team, and highly recommend to share the concerns with team members. As I said, plan for delays. Any doubt, clarify. Yes, I was thinking I know nothing about legal jargon. However, it did pay off to clarify anything I did not understand, because eventually the legal research office on the other side asked the same questions. So now I see that one clarification can cost me 4 weeks, so I do not hesitate. I found also very useful to make sure that as the researcher with a vested interest in the project and the timelines, that I was always involved in all correspondence because I could very quickly provide the information they needed or find that file or that previous agreement that they wanted. I also highly recommend to know your legal team liaison person. Don't miss that morning tea where that person visits your centre. That might be the only time you see that person face to face, but that will really help if you have to send that sort of reminder email. I have not heard anything about my agreement. I just wanted to mention, and probably everyone is fully aware of that, but because our project was only a 12-month project, it was really tricky to manage the personnel side when there's no certainty of time, which of course is always going to be if you're waiting for funding approval. But over 12 months, do you start the person a bit early, get things started, or do you wait till the funding has started, but then you've got to hit the ground running? That's a bit tricky. The other aspect is some of the project components are difficult to change last minute. We had an international visitor, and to reschedule obviously flights and visit due to some delays was pretty tricky. But I'm delighted to hear there's a revised version. I hear that it's even simplified, and that third party separate agreement is there now, because I think that should help then get the core of the issues started. Governance can approve that, and then some of the maybe separate sort of issue with the party could be dealt with if required, with maybe a bit more time. So yep, that's me and our little experience with BDHP Passport version 1. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Dominique. It's good to hear a personal example. Now, there's a few questions here, and I know, Sarah, you've been answering some of them as you go, and people may have seen that, but I just wanted to pull out a few things here. David and Sarah, one of the problems with the first version of the BDHP agreement was that our partners often wanted to pick apart the agreement and change some of the core components. And Sonia made this point very passionately, that we don't want to touch that. How confident are we that that won't be something that our partners wish to do with version 2?
You want to speak to that one, Son, to Sarah, or would you like me to talk?
Oh, I don't mind.
Well, I guess confidence interval, Scott. Yeah, look, I don't know. I think research, my understanding anyway, and having come into this reasonably late, like Sarah, is that the work that's been done with the collaboratively with the partners to simplify and move into version 2 should reduce that. I think my observation has been, and being in and around BDHP over the last few years in other programs, is that it's where the passport is used, I guess I would say, for the incorrect purpose. So we're trying to apply the wrong tool to the project that you're doing. So hence today the emphasis on what does the passport agreement do well, and where do you need to consider something else? The notion is, of course, if the passport is doing the job that it's set to do within the confines of what it's designed to do, it should be more effective and there shouldn't be any need to make changes. But we're very open to getting feedback and continuing to work with the HREG group to understand what changes might be necessary. The more we understand its application and use, the better we're able to provide education, training around where it's applicable, and also support negotiation of what changes might be needed. So it's a generic answer, Scott, but that's, I guess, a reasonably rational approach to the question. Sarah, have you got anything to add?
Further with two similar questions that came up from Deborah Askew and Susan Smith. So the first bit is, what if the administering organisation is outside the agreement, in other words, outside the BDHP? Should we use this agreement or another? And secondly, can this agreement be used for data-related quality improvement, quality assurance programs, now that you've got the template well set up, so non-classical research?
The beginning to for the beginning bit of your question, which was a third party leading, basically. I guess it's for the governance team to decide on which is the best contractor to use. The BDHP one is there, and they could use that one with being a third party. But I mean, I think it's more for the governance teams to be talking.
And the second part of the question, could the agreement be used for quality assurance, quality improvement, multi-site studies, which are not classically research?
It's currently for low risk research, so the quality stuff is something that BDHP could look into.
Thank you. And another question from Monica Taylor, which is an interesting one. What if your health service, you're leading this agreement development, and the health service has an agreement which includes third party? Which one should we run with and why? For your research governance teams to be discussing and looking at the contracts. It's the lead organisation should be directing which contract should be used. Yes, I think the challenge here is how do we disseminate the fact that the BDHP agreement has got very good acceptance by a number of clinical and academic partners. And I would be inclined to push back if I got that from the Research Governance Office. I know that some of the RGOs I've worked with or continue to work with are online, so I'm doing this with some risk. But I think we should push back and try and use this as so everyone gets to use it.
I think, Scott and Sarah, if I can just chime in here from a research governance perspective, for those of you who know me, I live in utopia, and I think that if we, like Scott says, if we can suggest perhaps a little bit more forcefully than just suggest, but certainly recommend that this agreement has been legally approved, not only by hospital and health services, but by academic research partners and independent medical research institutes, legal teams. So the relevant legal frameworks from which each of those organisations operates has been considered, and a partnership and a collaborative approach in dealing with these types of studies has been established. So if we can work together and spread the word amongst Queensland and invite other academic partners as well as other HHSs to use this as a basis or a foundation platform, then we can hopefully broaden the scope of its use and start to engage and have the conversations about crossing jurisdictional boundaries, including, providing a low risk, non-interventional research agreement that could sit quite nicely on the Medicines Australia website, for example, as a go-to for nationwide use.
Thank you very much, Sonia. That's excellent. And there'll be a lot of us wanting to sign up for that particular agreement because, as you've highlighted or previously highlighted, NH and MRC funded grants can't use this sort of agreement, but it would have been incredibly helpful for some of our work in the past. There's another good question which leads on from your comments, Sonia, and this perhaps is best for you, David, and that's what is BDHP doing to encourage this to be used more broadly? I see that Queensland Health as a partner of BDHP, as a signatory. What does that mean? Does that mean that I can use this if I'm part of Queensland Health at the Gold Coast, the Sunshine Coast and beyond, or is that not the case, and what work's being done in that space?
So notwithstanding the idea of the BDHP partnership, I think the Research Passport Agreement is in many respects ready to have that conversation about other HHSs. Obviously with Queensland Health as a signatory, if you're within Queensland Health, then you would be able to use it regardless of the location. And that would also include the functions of the health department. If you think about Pathology Queensland, potentially eHealth Queensland, these other groups that are not legal entities in their own right. So it's about understanding the legal entities that are partners here. And so I mean specifically partners to this agreement, not partners in BDHP. And I think the point Sonia made about the agreement and the current participants in the BDHP passport agreement and the rigour and I guess the thoroughness there and understanding its application. I think the next step is for us to continue to work with Queensland Health Innovation Investment Research Office. So we work with that group within health closely. They have recently pulled together a group of the research directors from the HHSs, and certainly one of the things that we've been talking to Hero regularly about is the passport agreement. Hero have also mentioned to us the notion of how the passport agreement might serve to create that starting point for a national mutual agreement. So certainly the conversation with the department is there. I don't see any impetus in terms of other HHSs, regardless of or other universities indeed in Queensland, regardless of membership to BDHP, being a signatory to the passport agreement. So that might get us through that governance hoop, Scott.
Yeah, I guess I'd just take that question a little further then. What's BDHP doing to encourage Queensland Health to perhaps adopt this as a Queensland-wide agreement that all HHSs outside Pathology Queensland and other more system-led services, what's your plans there?
So, I mean, I can't obviously speak on behalf of the department, but I know that I don't think it's about convincing the department. I think they're certainly willing, and that's really the next step. Now that the version 2 is out, the guidelines are out, we're engaging that HREG group. I think the very next step for us is to pursue exactly that line of expansion such that other universities and other groups working within Queensland, the HHSs, are able to use the passport agreement and get the benefit that the current BDHP partners get through the passport agreement. So I think that's the very next step, Scott, for us.
And maybe we've just got time for one quick question, and that's an interesting one about that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people related research is typically not characterised as low risk, even when the research methods are low risk. Can this agreement be utilised in that situation, or is it a blank no?
I don't have the expertise to respond to that one.
I think I could probably comment on this, and this is certainly a sticking point conversation-wise. Whilst we want to look at ethics and governance process as a complete package, it's important to distinguish the risk associated with or that's applied to the participants versus the risk that's associated to the organisation, researchers and data. So yes, whilst research with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples is not typically classified as low risk, I still believe that the BDHP passport agreement can be utilised in instances where the risk profile in terms of the activity done in terms of the data or the observational nature of the research could still be facilitated with the passport agreement. However, I would definitely consider the first step as contacting the relevant RGO or contract manager to have that discussion.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Sonia. And so, look, that brings us to the end of the webinar today. I've got one more slide just to get some feedback from you, but I wanted to start by thanking Professor Bell for making time today and for his commitment to translational research in Queensland. And we're very grateful for Scott's leadership on the BDHP board as well. So also a special thank you to our presenters today, to Sonia Hancock from Metro South Health and Dr. Dominique Bird from the University of Queensland. And also, of course, a thank you to Sarah Gottliebson and the BDHP team for bringing the webinar together today. So we've got one more slide on Menti, which is just about understanding. We're really keen to understand more what information we can provide you and how we can support the application. I think this conversation at the end and the question we've got are very useful, and we can certainly make contact with you, and we're very keen to hear from you. But if you'd like, we're happy to just get your brief feedback here, and you'll be able to see that on the screen. So we hope that this has been useful, and we're keen to get feedback as we continue the education, the training, and the better understanding of the passport agreement and what it does to streamline and to reduce time and cost and effort. It's just one of the things that BDHP needs to be doing to fulfill its role in working around translational research. Excellent. So thanks very much, everybody. I'll just hold that open while it's coming in. But once again, thank you to the presenters. Thank you to Sarah and the team for putting the webinar together today. And please stay in touch. If you've got questions that you've put through that we haven't had a chance to answer, we'd be very keen to follow up with you. And thank you again for your time today. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.